our topic is going to be discussing kind of the challenge or discussions over iterating versus evolving a game, especially over the course of series and franchises. And of course, the big example that came out this week is Crackdown 3. So, Crackdown has been in development, I think, has it been like 6 years in development? Does anyone know?
So it was announced in 2014. Cool. And so unless we assume that the day before E3 they just decided to do this game, then it's probably been in development since 2013 at least.
Okay. So it's been in development for a very long time, and it finally came out this week, and it's been getting kind of poor to mediocre reviews from a lot of places. A few people have liked it, and a lot of the common complaints have been that it just feels like Crackdown. 2007 Crackdown, but in 2019. And it's a very tricky line to walk. I know it's one that we've talked about a few times here, in terms of if you're trying to grow a franchise or grow a genre, is it better to iterate, or do you want to evolve and do something, even bigger and badder than before? Because there are major pros and cons of both sides of this. So I guess for Josh and Rob, it's going to be weird saying Josh again with me here, but what did you like? I'm sure, I know, Josh, you played Crackdown 3. Rob, have you had a chance to look at Crackdown 3 yet?
Oh, not 3. My experience goes all the way back to the first Crackdown, and I think my comment to start off is weird. It's weird to have a series that takes this long to even make a sequel, let alone not iterate on something per what this discussion is going to evolve into, I'm sure. So in this day and age where sequels are coming out every year for a lot of series, and certainly mods, and certainly just growing, even if they haven't come out with a full-on sequel, it's weird to see a sequel come out for a game that may have all been but forgotten, in that time, given all the other content out there. So, no, I have not played it, but I'm very interested to hear about it, since I did really like the concept of the first one.
Mm-hmm. So, for you, Josh, what did you think of Crackdown 3?
Well, I mean, I will say that for some, if you liked the first Crackdown, a lot of the critical consensus is that this is more Crackdown. So if you did like it, you would probably like Crackdown 3. What's interesting about in terms of like whether or not they iterated is, you're right that they didn't iterate really at all. It is more Crackdown 1. It's very polished. It's in 4K. But the game that I kept thinking about as I was playing, in terms of that criticism of this is just more of the same, is Sonic Mania, right? Sonic Mania is exactly what this game kind of is. Did you like those old Sonic games? Here is additional Sonic game for you. Did you like those old Crackdown games? Here is additional Crackdown for you. I have no explanation as to the time difference between those two. Was 6 years not enough? Did it need to be longer in between for us to be willing to accept something that is just additional Crackdown? Because everybody else that was making these games or that was inspired by these games did iterate, and I would argue iterated into nothing. That nobody found anything more successful than additional Crackdown. It's not clear to me what you would actually do to make this any more fun. Because if you liked Crackdown, it is that. It's fun to play. I don't know what mechanic or what system or MMO progression is missing from this that would actually do that, right? Like, you've got infamous Second Son and all of those games, which again took the same style of you're a superhero, you're OP from the beginning, and their solution to making it more interesting was intense cinematic storytelling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the Saints Row games obviously went the other way, and their solution to making Crackdown interesting was just cramming in as much bells and whistles and novelty stuff. So you would be in Crackdown open world and then go to a spaceship section and then cut to a hilarious comedy scene, cut to a turret section, right? And then back to Crackdown, right? That didn't really work either. It's not like anyone's itching for Saints Row the 5th right now. I don't know what exactly you would do to innovate on this genre to make it more fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep coming back to that Sonic mania of, would everybody be more excited about this game if it was 16 years instead of 6 years? That is just as absence makes the heart grow fonder kind of thing, and it just hasn't been enough. Or is it just that internal feeling of, whether it's Infamous or Saints Row or Crackdown 3, there's really not anything else you can do to that genre to make it more depth or whatever you're trying to do to it to get it towards this mythical idea of now it's a good game instead of the same game.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I agree with, you have this game that people like, and, what can you do to make it more? But I look at like Mario and Zelda, like they managed to change the game almost like completely sometimes to being almost unrecognizable, and yet they still managed to maintain this like novelty and core premise that people love. And I would expect like the game development team to somehow figure it out. Like I'm not that person who can come in except for sitting on the sideline saying, "Hey, maybe you could do this or maybe you could do that." But I kind of expect, and especially with 6 years, and it having been 11 years since the first one. I mean, that's a lot of time, and not only just 11 years since the first one, 11 years since the launch of the first one, let alone how long it spent in development. So it's hard for me to believe that there weren't concepts along the way that they kind of brushed to the side, and it's weird to me that they wouldn't at least pick up a couple of those and bring them in to really refresh what they made to begin with. I know iteration for me is super important. Like I love when people take risks with a property. Some of the greatest things out there right now in terms of cinema are for that reason alone. Like they take the superhero movies and they're way different than the original comics, like just by leaps and bounds, so to speak. So I love the concept of you start out as a superhero and give him more OP as the game goes on. I wonder how a sequel comes out of that. Like, where do you take that superhero afterwards? But that's where I have to go back and play and do the research myself.
So, this came up in chat. I know you two were just talking about, but the Saints Row franchise is a really good or very interesting example. Because as we all know, Saints Row originally started out as simply just being another Grand Theft Auto game. And then it wasn't until like 3 that they just went completely over the top. Then they got to Saints Row 4, Get Out of Hell, and Agents of Mayhem. And a lot of people felt like they kind of went like too far in terms of just going completely over the top. So I guess for both of you, like, what did you make of kind of like that course that Saints Row did?
With Crackdown, here's the thing. Overwhelmingly, the entire time you're playing, I never got the feeling that this was rushed or lazy or a cash grab or anything like that. Nothing that's in there looks bad. The cutscenes are maybe cheap, but they are, somebody cared about them a lot, right? And there's so much in the game there, like, the opening cutscene is amazing because you got this great Terry Crews performance. And if the entire game it's Crackdown, but this time it's filtered through the persona of what we imagine Terry Crews to be like in real life, right? Like
those Old Spice commercials. That would be Crackdown. Exactly. Old Spice would have been the best.
Yeah. If you just had more Crackdown, but it was entirely filtered through the head of Terry Crews and you're just listening to him the whole time and reacting as him, player one becomes Terry Crews, that would have been enough. But it's not that. He goes away. He's a skin that you basically wear. There's a lot. It was like the 6 years was clearly spent on the multiplayer, by the way. This Crackdown single player probably has been done for a while. It just looks like they had no resources or not enough of a team or something to do what they did. And here's actually the best example. So you complete a location on the maps, like a Ubisoft game. There are locations, and then each one of those can complete, and you get a reward or whatever. So you complete a location, and immediately after there, it plays a little animation, and then you have about a minute or so to kind of mop up, right, loot the bodies or whatever. And as you're doing that, there's audio logs, like your people are talking to you, NPCs are talking to you over the radio. And there are already, by the way, 2 NPCs that talk to you, basically 2 narrators. Again, it seems like there were ideas that had been cut or messed with. Mm-hmm. So there are already 2 people in your head talking to you. Those 2 people, after this location, are having a conversation amongst themselves in your ear. And you're, of course, not listening to this because player one's mind is on, like, okay, I just completed a location. I need to heal up and do my menuing or whatever. And out of that conversation, there comes some big story revelation that they figure out amongst themselves, which then triggers a full-screen cutscene in the middle of, I'm like, listening, and then suddenly they're excited, and then now we're in a cutscene, and then back to the open world again, and then they start talking again, and I'm still at this done location, right? There's a lot of things, but neither of those, nothing is jank, right? Nothing sounds bad or looks bad. It's just that, like, I don't know what, it's just not finished, or like there's not enough time or not enough people. But what's there isn't. I don't want this getting in that category of Fallout 76 or something that's just. Yeah, it's quality.
It's not bad, basically. It's not like, I think, and that's very hard to talk about. I think Rob can agree with me as well on this, that we have certainly, I know the chat brought us as well, there are games out there that you can tell the developers didn't half-ass it. That, this wasn't just, we're going to spend 2 hours a day, do it 6 months, release, and hope get, day one sales. And even when you see that level of passion, though, sometimes a game just turns out okay. Like, it's not bad. It's not going to, win every Game of the Year award. It's just there. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, again, we've all played games like that, where it's good, but it doesn't, like, stick with us. Like, the same way as when people think of, like, God of War or Spider-Man, or even, as we said a few minutes ago, with Apex Legends. Or
I uninstalled Crackdown. I got about 7 hours in, and then I uninstalled it. Mm-hmm. That's the staying power of Crackdown.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think one thing that it sounds like this was born out of more than anything is when you have a sequel and you're just like, why did you go so off the rails? Why didn't you just stick to what worked? Mm-hmm. And maybe the director or the producer was just like, you know what, let's stick to what works and not even try. Like, let's just make sure it's core and that's it. Because Lord knows how many times that I've had that complaint. Is it, why did you go so? Why didn't you just stick to what works? And now I'm complaining that someone stuck to what works way too much. Although it's its own complaint. Like, split the difference. Somehow find that happy medium.
Yeah. And as Josh was talking about, with Sonic Mania being a really good example, that Sega, for the last, what are we up to now? Like, over 20 years, have been doing their damnedest in terms of trying to get Sonic to work in the modern audience. And every time, they were either beaten by Mario, or it just turned out to be this horrible game, or just not being up to par. Again, I think Shadow the Hedgehog didn't turn out well. The one that just came out that was based off of the TV show, that one got some bad reviews. So finally, Sega just said, you know what? Let's just let somebody who likes Sonic, or old school Sonic, make a new Sonic game. And it's, again, more Sonic. And It turned, and that was just basically like the bar that it had to clear, and it did well. Yeah, I think it was Sonic Boom News.
So the one, yeah, where you could make your own character.
No, I think there was another one before that.
Bad Games.
Yeah, something like that. But here's a question, and I know, Josh, I know this one will probably get you interested. Regarding Assassin's Creed as a franchise, I know we've spoken, I know you're a huge fan of Odyssey and Origins. Mm-hmm. And Assassin's Creed franchise is another very interesting case of how things have developed. Again, the first one was just okay. Again, it did what it set out to do, wasn't anything special. I think it got, again, like average to okay reviews. And then they started to grow it with 2. And then it started to become a yearly series like Call of Duty and Battlefield for a time, and so on. Or maybe not even Battlefield, but the point is, like, when you think about Assassin's Creed, do you see that as a franchise that has evolved its design, or iterated, or it's just simply refined and polished that same formula from game to game to game?
Yeah, it's what's interesting with the Assassin's games is there are multiple layers of it that are evolving in different directions, right? And so one, I guess, pillar of Assassin's Creed is the parkour style gameplay of, you know, you're kind of a ninja. It's platforming, but it's not really platforming. It's more just traversal, interesting traversal, as opposed to don't fall, don't get hit by an enemy kind of thing. That has evolved more towards, because the designer behind that has moved on to this game that's coming out called like Ancestors or something like that, where you are a caveman, or you are an ancient like human, proto-human in the jungles of Africa, kind of evolving. And that, obviously, the parkour is you're a monkey jumping from tree to tree kind of thing. So there's that gameplay side of Assassin's Creed. Then you have one of the other things that made Assassin's Creed cool at the time, which was just how it looked and sort of the aesthetic of a parkour hoodie dude who's like kind of a ninja, and he's like in the Middle East kind of thing, right? All of this in 2007 plays differently, plays with the audience differently than it does now, right? Mm-hmm. We're looking for different things visually or in our characters. That side of things, where is my generic stubbly video game protagonist looking at the camera as his eyes are shadowed out right below the title, right? That audience is maybe not being served in the current market, right? Like, where is my generic shooty man game or herdy man, as it were? But then the other side of the open world historical exploration side, that game is still very much alive and well in Origins and especially in Odyssey. It depends what piece of Assassin's Creed you really liked and what piece really resonates with you, and whether or not you feel like that game or that franchise is really iterating and innovating, or if that franchise is dead to you, right? Like, there's plenty of people that feel like Assassin's Creed is just dead. They haven't made an Assassin's Creed game in years. But that they're describing a specific piece. The open world, I want to go to ancient Egypt or ancient Greece and walk around and go on adventures there. That side of the game is very much alive and well, as long as you don't also require it to be, I want to wear a hood and also be traveling through DNA into the future and whatever that garbage is. Like, that stuff is...
Isn't there something with aliens in Assassin's Creed? Is that like a plot point?
Those are when you skip those cutscenes. Here's the thing, I have like 170 in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Out of that, I would say probably 10 minutes involve the future, the present day, I should say. That's how little that has anything to do with anything anymore, because it was always stupid. It just complicates things. Just, why do you want time travel? Like, do you want sort of what's that movie with Tom Hanks where they're, the Templars and all that? If you want that conspiracy stuff, play that game. If you want history open world game, play that game, right? Those two games never really talk to each other very well. It was like the Rainbow Six games where it's like combining a shooter and also a top-down strategy game. Like, just leave those by themselves.
And that's where the over iteration comes in. It's like let's add a whole other game segment to this that doesn't make sense and alienates our audiences.
Yeah. And again, like as we said, it's very hard to know just how far.
That's true.
There you go. Yeah, bring back Prince of Persia. But it's very hard, as Rob, as you were saying earlier, to know just how far you go before you kind of lose what made that game work. And, I mean, we can talk about, like, the Trine franchise, and how Trine 3 was just such a reviewing disaster for the game and for the franchise. When they decided to move into 3D, they made it more games as a service kind of element to it. And even with Prince of Persia, that's another good example. A lot of people just despise would that be considered the fourth game? I know it was considered a reboot. The Prince of Persia that after the third one, I think it was just called Prince of Persia. Like, that one, a lot of people just did not like. They felt that it betrayed, again, the core gameplay that the franchise has set up.
Yeah, I almost think that the way you described the first Assassin's Creed reminds me of the original Prince of Persia, in that that's kind of, you got this whole new feel in terms of how you made your character move. And when I saw that a fully 3D immersive thing was being made, I just like, well, how does that translate from the original platformer that I know? Because, once you get into this 3D world, movement and that kind of thing seems like you can't really iterate on it much. But yeah, when you talk about it from the Assassin's Creed side of things, you can, and they did. And that is a very unique trait that I feel like some series managed to bring out, and I don't know how well they keep on with it.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Assassin's Creed mobility a lot when I was playing Crackdown. Because Crackdown has that same idea of you're jumping from place to place and all of that. Obviously, super exaggerated compared to Assassin's Creed, but in terms of iterating on modern design, the animation system in Assassin's Creed, because Ubisoft is very concerned about the visual fidelity of things, make sure that when you're switching from, one foot is kind of up on a ledge, and then you turn around and then you start to climb, everything is very fluid. And to do that, do that, you have to, the game is actually in microseconds and during certain frames, it's taking control away from the player and just assuming, I think you meant to do this, right? And there were so many times in Crackdown where I would get stuck on like the lip of a doorway in trying to jump up or something like that, where I feel like, okay, that's one thing where you should have really looked at Assassin's Creed and understood that, like, you should have known what I was trying to do there, right? Like, a little tiny thing like in Assassin's Creed, you're not going to get stuck on the lip of something because it wants to be so fucking awesome. If you're ninja running and everything, it's gonna make those little smooth out your movements and assume you meant to jump there in that specific way. That Crackdown won't, right? And it's that little piece of modern games do that. They'll take away control so it still looks cool, or to keep you from getting stuck on a chair or stuff like that. That's a little piece of modern design that was missing from Crackdown. That you could say, like, that's one area you should have iterated there. You should have looked at other games and how they take account for the player in terms of geometry and movement and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds exactly like one of those things that in the 6 years of development they could have tried to do something with. Like when I hear 6 years, I know a good game takes 3 to 4 years to really get out there and make it great and polished. But when you have 6 years and you already have a concept, like you don't have to round out that character anymore. It's there. It's like the concept is done. You just have to make a game and hopefully iterate it on it a little bit and make things more polished and a little better. And it sounds like the polish is there, but yeah, 6 years does not, when there's little things like that someone can complain about, you don't feel like there's an excuse for there. It doesn't sound like they had to rush it, but at the same time, obviously something went on in that studio, whether it was just it went dark for a year or something like that and was resurrected. Like, who knows what happened there? But it seems like with that amount of time and a named kind of sequel, you have that chance, and it's hard not to be disappointed by something that obviously had the opportunity to be great and is good.
Yeah. So here's what.
If 6 years gets you Crackdown 3 and 7 years gets you Red Dead Redemption 2, like,
what the hell happened in those extra
hold it till 2020.
Take that extra year. Do it.
Yeah.
So here's the question then I have. Like, what did you guys think of Darksiders 3 that came out? What was that, like late 2018, I guess, at this point? And like, again, that franchise has been in very slow development over the years, and they've said that the third game was kind of done, I think, like with like a very slash budget compared to the first two, but it still turned out, it still, I guess, met projections according to news reports.
Well, I'm going to say real quick here that eventually we're going to stumble over a game that I've played. So
I haven't played Darkstalkers is the one that I played. That was a fighting game. But I haven't played that. I do remember that, and that again, I remember a very similar consensus to Crackdown fans on Crackdown 3, which was, if you liked this game, you're gonna like this one. But it's, I think, part of what I like about AAA games is that how accessible they are. That if I want to play a shooter game, Call of Duty is going to let me do that. I don't need to. It's not a simulator that I need to know. And I could also go, oh, Rob, you've never played Call of Duty? Here, install it. In 5 minutes, you're going to be getting kills. You're going to understand how that gun works, like all of that. That kind of, if a game doesn't do that, if a game isn't the one where you can say, oh, I played it before, this is the one to jump on, that is considered a fault these days. And that's where you're going to get some of those middling reviews. That's where you're going to see a lot of these bad Crackdown reviews, is because they have nothing better to say than, it's the same. If you like it, you'll like it. I think Darksiders had that same effect of, it's not the one that's going to change your mind on Darksiders. It's not the one that's going to make you, if you never played it before, you're fine. you don't need to play this one. But if you did, this is it.
Man, you did touch on something that I know Josh and I have talked about before, and that is like keeping to established norms, even if those norms are like relatively recent. But yeah, being able to pick up a game and say, well, I've played game A, so therefore I could probably play game B without a problem, even though it's a new experience that I would consider a separate game altogether. Like, platformers always use the same buttons to jump and dash and all that kind of stuff. Shooters always use the same controls, and you can always, adapt your controls to, either inverse or whatever. But, they've always got these similarities, ARPGs, which is more my cup of tea. Like, they all have the same kind of control scheme, and I understand that, and I can move on from one to the next and enjoy the new things each one has to offer. But yeah, it feels like, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to push this one over because I can't speak to these games directly. But when you do not keep up with the established norms that are constantly coming out, that people are accepting, it sounds like the Fortnite, the other battle royale that I can't remember anymore, Apex something. Exactly, that's how good my memory is. But like, it sounds like that's exactly what it did better than anything. Is it iterated, it took established norms, it just boiled them all down and made like this beautiful soup of battle royale game. And I feel like that's understanding the genre, that's understanding who you are and what you bring to the table that makes your game an epitome of that genre. And keeping to the comfort zone it kind of disappoints, I feel.
So, I guess with that said, though, and again, I agree with you, Rob, about it is still important to look at modern design conventions, especially as we've said many times over. And as News is saying in chat there, like tutorial and UI design, that's kind of like fundamentals in my opinion. That's kind of like if you're building a car, you know where the steering wheel goes, or you know where the brake pads are. Like if you can't even get that part right, it's going to hurt your game in a lot of ways. It's kind of like a self-inflicted wound, I think, in my opinion, when it comes to trying to get more people in. Like, as you just said, Josh, regarding Call of Duty, like, that franchise has been refined to the point that you can give that to someone, and they're going to just get right to the good stuff. Like, you're not going to spend 5 hours trying to, before it starts to give you, you know, level up, rank up, you've unlocked a perk, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's, and in that, it's, a lot of people can interpret that as dumbing it down, right? Or, or making it for dummies and things like that. But Apex Legends is that perfect example of you weren't all of those things you had to learn to be able to play PUBG or play Fortnite or play Blackout or whatever. You weren't learning something useful. You weren't making meaningful choices or whatever game design. You know, buzzword. That's not an active play mechanic to know that to change your gun equipment, you have to drop it all on the floor and then pick it back up in a certain order, right? Is that skill? Are you high skilled if you know that, or is that just some bullshit that you have to do, right? And so Apex is that idea of just remove that stuff so you can actually get to what makes the game fun. And Call of Duty has that, and I think a lot of AAA games have that just get to what is actually the game part of it, the part that makes your brain active and interested, whatever you want to call fun, releasing dopamine. Get to that part of it without all that extra stuff, the junk. And Battle Royale has subconsciously, I don't think this was like, you know, some neckbeard at PUBG Incorporated going, no, we have to make the map shitty in order to make it a real game, right? Like, I don't think it's like that. It's just we haven't been thinking about it until somebody did it right. And Call of Duty is an example of somebody did that years and years ago. Right, arguably the first World War II Call of Duties were somebody taking that same idea of let's remove a bunch of crap from Doom or Half-Life or whatever, right? Like, you know, we look at you can only carry 2 guns as an interesting mechanic, but was in Half-Life having 32 guns across the top of your screen, was that interesting at all? Was it really? Or was that just so we could say we had a number of them? So what if we just did 2 guns, right? It's that same idea of like, just get to the part that's the actual game, and then you can, that's the concept, right? Then you can innovate on that or tutorialize that part versus that other junk.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, Josh, and something that you said earlier regarding Apex Legends I think fits here as well. Because when we talk about a company that knows how to iterate and refine an idea, Blizzard is definitely one of these standouts, or they've been for some time. Again, we're kind of in that nervous point about what's going on over there, considering all that layoffs that happen. But again, one of the big things about Blizzard has always been saying, what is the best part of the genre? Let's focus everything on that. You know, screw everything else. You know, we don't need, you know, pain points. We don't need difficulty spikes. Just what does someone want out of the genre? Let's do that. And we'll do that the very best damn way we can. And that's going to be our game. And it sounds simple, but it's turned into Hearthstone, Overwatch, even something like Heroes of the Storm. And like we said, like in those cases, Blizzard doesn't evolve their games, not in the same way as other developers do, but they do it in such a polished form that it almost feels like it is. And like this was again right back to Apex Legends, as you were talking about with like the quality of life improvements, like that kind of stuff. It sounds simple, this sounds like beginner course game design stuff. But if it was so simple, why didn't every single developer do that after PUBG or after Fortnite?
Yeah, I do think it comes down to, and I think everything, by the way, that News is saying is absolutely true, and I think we can agree with most of it.
Yeah.
But I do think that what you say about it being, difficult is absolutely true, and I think where you get to a lot of the points where, Ultimate Josh, I'll use your name, your gamer tag there, but like a lot of things that come up there that make it more difficult to learn are developers, designers who want a cool concept in there and don't think of the most player-friendly way to integrate it. They think, oh, this is going to be cool, like the million guns. Like, oh, I want nothing but guns. I love the different, all that stuff. And you put it in there and you don't realize how useless that is at a certain point. You don't want to scroll through a million guns when you play. As cool as it, like, I love having all that stuff, and ARPGs are notoriously bad at giving you an infinite number of options, and I do like that, but it is overwhelming to just jump off in the game, because the last thing you want to worry about is, okay, so what weapon should I be using? I have a choice of 1,000. You don't want that player to just be, okay, I'm stuck already. You want people to just jump in, and if you can do that successfully, you should be a master of game design at a very high level.
Yeah. Do I want the fire axe or do I want the burning axe? Is fire damage different from burning damage? Ice versus freezing. That's not confusing at all to somebody new. And I think here's another point. We'll begin to wrap things up for this part, and then we'll move on to our Weird Games segment, because we'll be here for another 3 hours if we're not careful. I can feel it right now in my bones. But that kind of challenge of trying to streamline while still keeping the raw essence, I guess, we're definitely seeing the fighting game genre kind of, in kind of like a pseudo-civil war between itself over these last few years. And I know, Josh, I know you've watched EVO, I know you've kind of followed that scene, and you've probably followed more than Rob and I. But, like, when we look at the fighting game genre, like, for myself, I always find that just, like, it's almost like Kaizo to me. It's like this mythical mountain that I can't seem to climb. But there are people, just like with the Kaizo genre, who are amazing at it. Again, EVO being the brilliant example of it. And the fighting genre has definitely been having that, I don't know if I want to say growing pains, but again, that kind of image issue of how do we make this so that those Grandmaster EVO players are happy, but likewise, somebody who can't string a 5-hit combo to save their lives can still play and enjoy this game.
Yeah, so part of that is all of that really technical stuff. When you see those like frame analysis and things on fighting games, so much of that is it's a complicated way of explaining something that that's really the only way you can explain it, because the phenomenon they're explaining is things like how hard a thumb pushes a button at what precise second, that the player that knows that stuff intuitively got it from playing, right? And so how do I describe something like muscle memory, or how far I move my hand when I'm aiming the mouse and things like, how do you describe that? Well, you do it in intense granular technical information, because otherwise, if I explain it like a person explains it, it doesn't make any sense. Oh yeah, you just do that.
Yeah.
Right? How do you do a backflip? Right? Oh well, you just jump up in the air and you throw your legs backwards, right? And then you land.
It's just
Okay?
that simple.
Boom,
It's
boom,
that
boom.
simple. That's how you do a fighting game comp. Is you layer on your attacks, as many as possible, until they break it or the combo ends because of the mechanics, right? That's how you do a combo. That's not a reproducible way of explaining it. And so what you're seeing in that FGC stuff is trying to mathematically and scientifically explain something that is ultimately just, you jump up in the air and turn around backwards and then you've done a flip, right? The problem of accessibility is not actually that those things exist. It's that that's the first thing you, the non-fighting game player, think of when you think of that game. Sort of like when people say, "Oh, I don't play Call of Duty because I can't aim. I'm not very good." Right? Why do you think that Call of Duty, in order to play Call of Duty, you have to be an expert marksman? Why is it that you think that? Why is it that you think that in order to play Street Fighter, you have to understand perfect positioning and frame data and things like that? That's a problem of the community and then the media ecosystem, not a problem with how accessible those games are.
Yeah.
Separate from that is that conversation, though, about special moves and things like, is Googling the right answer to something a skill? And we know that that's not the full story, right? Because you still have to be able to execute that button combination. And then further, you have to be able to execute that button at the correct time or reasonably correct in a competitive sense. So there is skill there, but that first step of, and even the second step of, can you memorize the combination, and then can you correctly input the combination? That is debatable whether or not that's a game mechanic or that's some shit you got to do. I personally don't think it's an interesting thing. But plenty of people do, right?
I think my
superior fighting
connection
game. But there are plenty of other categories that you would actually judge a game on. First of all, for me, it's a spectator, right? Mortal Kombat is a more interesting game than Street Fighter or Smash, just because it looks better to me, right? But in terms of that skill, I don't know. That's a debate. And it's a personal debate. It's not a debate you can ever win, right? Like, maybe a majority of people might agree with my opinion, majority might disagree with my opinion, but that doesn't mean that a game that does the opposite of that is incorrect if somebody finds it fun and plays it, you know?
See, that's interesting. That could be a topic unto itself. Because in a way, what we've described with Street Fighter is, one, you're right about the whole the scene and how complex it seems when you just watch experts playing it, and you feel like the game is not friendly. When at the heart of it is, Street Fighter plain. It's just jumping right, jumping left, knowing when to hit, knowing when to block, and learning that. And it does take a lot of time and experience to get good at all those things, but there's always someone at your level to play. But yeah, that's an interesting take that the media surrounding it, and it just feels like it's impossible to get in. But you forget that these guys who are the experts, I mean, how many thousands, if not tens of thousands of hours have they played? And the first hour they played, they probably weren't, going to beat anyone at that high of a level way back then. I love the topic of esports, and I want to hear more about what you have to say about it, because I know you're like that's what you do. So maybe one of these days we can have that.
Yeah, maybe we'll say that for like a next week chat if you're free, Josh. Because I think we start talking about esports now. That will be another hour and a half easily. Like, it's nothing. But yeah, getting back to both your points about the fighting game genre, again, yeah, it's a very fascinating to track its evolution. So I'm going to put you on the spot again, Josh. Do you consider Smash to be a proper fighting game?
Yeah.
Well, that was easy.
It's the scene, the FGC scene and the Smash scene. I believe they consider themselves kind of separate. I would consider them both a kind of confederate together in the FGC, the broader FGC. But then again, the Smash community also has a lot of bleed over into the speedrunning community, and so is Smash a fighting game? Yes. Does it belong together with the FGC at events and tournaments? Yes, although I would say that the ultimate goal, the platonic idea of what you'd want out of an esport fighting game is that game gets its own thing, right? It's that today is the Daytona 500. They don't have the Daytona 500 followed by the Kentucky Derby, followed by the World Series all in one place, right? Because the sport can stand on its own. So I would hope that Smash could stand on its own the same way any esport could. But are they the same? And Smash certainly has more in common with the FGC than it does with Legends or CS:GO or the Overwatch League, purely because the Smash scene and the FGC are completely democratic. There is no developer control. There is no, hey, publisher, please pay our salary. Everything you see in the FGC, everything you see in the Smash scene is hand-built by people in that community for their purposes, right? And so it has more in common with that than like League of Legends, where even a pro League of Legends player is still ultimately a marketing employee for Riot, the publisher, right? Yes, as a long, complicated, Smash belongs with the FGC.
All right. And since we are over an hour into our stream, I think we better move on to our weird game segment, and then we'll see about a second topic, because if we're not careful, we'll just stay on esports again for a long time. But I guess to put a ribbon or a tie ribbon on this discussion about iteration versus evolving. So I guess my final thoughts are that there is nothing wrong with just doing what worked and just doing it again. But I think, as we've said, that if you want to appeal to a wider audience, especially appeal to a modern audience, you still need to look at what's going on. You need to kind of keep your finger as to the pulse of, new design conventions. Your example from like the animations in Assassin's Creed, I think that's a really good one. And again, it kind of shows again that difference between what worked in 2007 and where we're at now in 2019. And one of the reasons that Nintendo continues to still be one of the best at iterating on these designs is that they get, what makes their games work, and then it's, okay, how do we go further with that? And I mean, you can see this when we look at the jumps from Sunshine to Galaxy, Galaxy to 2, 2 to Odyssey, and so on. Or I'm sorry, did I say? Yeah, I think I said Sunshine if I didn't. But the point is that you need to be able to, again, understand what you're trying to go for, and then figure out, okay, do we want to push things further, or do we want to make that the very best version of it? And it's hard to say where Crackdown falls on that at the moment. But I'll turn it over to you guys. So for you, Rob, do you have any final thoughts on this topic?
I mean, you kind of put it all in a nutshell for me. I mean, I agree with all of that. You got to decide how far you want to go, but you got to pay attention to what's going on right now. I mean, if you don't pay attention to what's going on right now, what new audience members are you getting? That you can get only the old people because they're cool with the old ways. They're not. You want to get them